Now, one of the first things we're going to do when we are setting up the rendering is first we're going to take this layer here with the kit bash pieces, and we're just going to go to the surface here, the mesh here, and then set the render to no, so it's not part of the rendering. And then we're going to go in and optimize some settings. So we're going to go here to the render node and go to the settings. So first here you have the settings for the resolution and so on, but there are some things you can optimize. First of all, I don't want Gaussian, I want cat mode 1 because it's a bit sharper and I like that. But Gaussian is the default one. So something we're going to do is that we have the reflection and the refraction depth, and since we're using blurry reflections, it needs to shoot a lot of reflection rays, and it's using 8 bounces, which is totally overkill for what we're doing since we only have like a singular object. If I have a big scene, then I usually have more than one, but for now we can just set this to 1 because it doesn't need to bounce all that much. This quite often speeds up the rendering significantly. We can go in and change some things here. Environment's important sampling, we're going to enable that because it just makes the global illumination look much better and cleaner, and it's off by default for some reason, but it's really good. And that's all the settings we're going to go and change. Oh wait, yeah, get me wrong. So only doing that is going to help us quite a bit. And I'm actually going to turn off the environment here, so we have the one that we added before, and you can actually go here to the environment tab and click disable camera. So if we bring it up now, we only have the gun, and it just makes it a bit easier to focus on. So here's the gun, and now we're going to start doing some texturing. So the first thing I'm going to texture is the wood, and it's very straightforward. I'm just going to drag drop an old wood texture that I have lying around, just drag drop it onto the material, and it ended up somewhere else instead. Alright, I'll just drag it here, and we have the textured view here on. Swap the texture only actually, so you see, and then we go to the texture locator here, and you can see now it's using the default UVs it has generated, but we want to use planar, which works pretty well for wood, and then you have the projection axis, the different axes you can choose between. I'm going to use the x-axis because it makes most sense, and it works kind of well because it looks like a cutout piece like this, but there are ways we can make it look a bit more natural. So first I want to rotate it a bit, just so that it's more aligned with the angle of the stock here, so something like that. And then I also want to rotate it slightly in the different axes. So if we look up here, and we're going to rotate it like a few degrees, and put it like this, and we're doing this just to get rid of this perfect mirrored surface, because now there's at least a few pixels here, so that just lets us get rid of some of the worst stretching scenarios. There's still some problems with it, but it's a lot better than what you would have if you just projected it straight on. So that's the diffuse color, but we want to add this one in the other channels as well. So I'm just going to take this one and instance it, or actually no, I'm just going to duplicate it, and then set it to the roughness channel. I'm going to duplicate it again and set this one to the bump channel. So, but I'm going to have to tweak these values to make it look right. So I'm going to bring up the rendering, and you see it's very dark right now. A few things I want to change here with the basic rendering as well. I'm going to take this final color output that we have, and I'm going to go to render output here, and I'm just going to turn up the gamma to like 1.2. And I'm going to take the wood, the diffuse one here, and I'm going to bring up the high value to like 200%. Which is, probably not accurate, but it just brings it up a little bit more. Makes the metal and the wood be a little bit more in the same range. And then we have the roughness. And you can actually preview the different channels here, shader effects, and you go to the basic channels, and now you can see the roughness. So this is what it looks like right now. This is really good if you're doing things like masks and you want to see how your multiplies are working and so on, or just want to preview things. So I use these kind of channel rendering modes a lot when I'm setting things up. So in this case I want to invert this one because I want it to be basically the invert of the diffuse. But it's way too bright, so I'm gonna have to change the values a little bit, and since it's inverted I have to do it like the opposite way. So I'm going to change the high value here as well to 200, so it'll make it darker, and I'm going to change the low value, bring that up a little bit more, something like this maybe. Check. Bit too flat. Well, actually it's the material itself. I'm going to crank up the specular amount to 15. There we go. This looks a bit nicer. And then we have the bump as well. You have to be careful when you're adding things like straight up diffuse texture as a bump, because it's easily looks very crappy. So basically here's the value for the bump map, but then you have the actual depth here, the bump amplitude. So I'm just going to change that to like, cut it down to like 50% maybe. Actually I think I want the roughness to be a bit darker as well, so maybe you can crank this up to 250%. That looks a lot nicer. So this is a good way of dealing with, when you only have one mask or one texture and you still want it to have like different contrast and different values. You can just go in here in the texture and just adjust these values. It's a lot faster than sitting and creating masks in Photoshop and then, putting on levels and, trying to judge how it's gonna look, especially when you're doing just like rendering like this and it's not gonna go anywhere else. And even if you're gonna bake this one out, you've already set it up to be in the range you want, so it's going to come out correctly anyway. So the last thing I want to do is that I want to add some wear and tear, or basically some nice highlighting. So I'm going to add occlusion, which I'm going to go here to the shading effects. I'm going to look at the diffuse color here. So right now it's set to uniform. I'm going to set it to convexity, like this, and you see here it's just basically just creating a tiny mask here. Set this to 100 millimeters maybe, but a little bit less, a bit more tight. Actually this part here, I'm just going to go and quickly do some modeling here. I want this one to be sub D now, so if that's gonna work fine. I think so. Just gonna scale it a tiny bit. Just because I don't want to use the rounded shader on this one, and I want the curvature here to have a little bit more to work with. So something like this, and we're going to set the colors for it, and we're going to do a similar thing to what we did with the ribs, is that we're going to use the alpha values here. So I'm going to set this to something instead of the black, we're going to have something closer to the wood like this, and then we're just gonna remove this one by setting the alpha to 0. And we can set the alpha here to like a bit less, maybe 75%, because I don't want it to override completely, because that's unnatural. So if we bring this up now, you see that we have this highlight here, and it looks a bit fake, but actually maybe we can just put this to screen. Doesn't make much of a difference, but yeah. How about or maybe we can, oh, doesn't look good. Let's just go with a screen. Right, so if we just go to the final color output now, we have like a relatively subtle wear, and it's, you know, it's not exactly very realistic, since the wood grain actually disappears here, but still makes it a bit less uniform. So that's it for the wood, and this is what it looks like when it's cleaned up a little bit more. Right, so let's move on to the metal. So for this one, I'm going to first do a couple of things. I'm just going to set the diffuse amount. It's going to stay the same, because if I lower this, it's going to look black. It's annoying. So I'm going to stay here, but I'm going to set the color to black, like 100% black. And this is because I'm going to turn down the specular amount to like 80%, just to make it a bit darker, basically. And we don't want it to look black, so we're going to do the same trick that we did before. We're going to just add a constant, which we're going to just place here, and set it like something like this, and then 1% opacity, so it doesn't actually impact anything. And since this is a metal, we will be mainly dealing with the roughness. So I have a couple of textures. This one, for example, which I will just use as a quick mask. So I'm just going to drag drop this one in here, and I'm just going to place it over everything here, so that it doesn't get overridden by the small and the large. And then I'm just going to set the texture locator to be cubic mapped, and it's too big right now, so I'm going to set it to like 400 millimeters or something, or like this. You see there's lots of seams and so on, but whatever. And what you can do now is that you can rotate it, because you still have tiling, you know, and it's pretty easy to spot tiling. So if you rotate it, it's a lot harder for someone to spot the tiling. So something like this, it's pretty good. And I'm going to set it to roughness and not diffuse color. And since the texture is set to normal, it's overriding any roughness values that we had in the original material. So I'm gonna change some values in it, because first of all, I don't want the black parts to be like mirror polish. So I'm just gonna bring up the bottom values to like 30%. We look now. we have some roughness variation here. So that's a start. But I want something more to break it up. So I have another texture here, which I'm just going to add, which is like just another dirt texture. I'm going to set this one to multiply instead. And do the same with this one and just set it to a cubic. Maybe this one can be 750 millimeters or something like that. And this one we don't rotate with the same degree because we don't want tiling artifacts to be in the same position. So something this maybe. Check it here. Actually, we can leave this one without rotating because that changes where the cuts are. Right, so we're gonna have this one here, but let's see how that looks. So actually I think I want to change this one's rotation because the seam there is really bothering me. Okay, that's a pretty good base, I would say. So one thing that I always like to do is that I like to you know, just to get some feeling of a grease in the corners and so on, I'm going to add some occlusion that's masking the reflection. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to add another occlusion node here. And this time I'm going to set this to reflection. So if we bring up this one and go to the roughness shading, so I'll set this one to roughness, of course, yeah. It's pretty much, it's meant to be for reflection occlusion. So I was going to set the spread angle to 175 degrees. So this is pretty much like an ambient occlusion. It's a bit more, it's a bit different since it's a reflection occlusion. It's a bit more aggressive, actually. We can change the values here, like how long the distance should be. So maybe 0.5 meters. Probably enough. And then you can change things like the bias and the gain. The gain is pretty much the contrast, and the bias is how much it's biased in either direction. So if we set it to 10%, it'll be much more white, and you set it to 90%, it'll be much more aggressive on the other end. But this is a bit too much, so maybe we can set it to like 80% or something. 75. Right now this is overriding all the roughness values, and we don't want that. So I'm just gonna set this one to screen. And we're just gonna flip the values. So, or actually it's not even the values, since these are the colors, so these are the values. It's very different. It's like colors only if it's a color channel, and value is if it's like a value channel, like roughness, for example. So this one should be 100 and this one should be 0. So it's the opposite, because we want it to be more dirty in the corners, like this. And that makes it look a bit nicer, like this. Just makes it feel a bit more dirty. But what I'm going to do is that I'm going to create an instance of this one and set that to the specular color, actually. The specular color here. And then the gonna have to go to the shading effect here, specular color, and we're gonna set this one. Oh, actually, we can't have it to screen. It needs to be multiply on this one instead, like this. So now it actually multiplies here, so it's going to be less reflection value and more diffuse value here as well. So if you would have any rust, for example, this is a good way of doing it, because if you have reflection on the rust, it's not going to look like rust. So go back here now. It's even more pronounced because we set the diffuse color to black, so it actually darkens these areas. So it's a bit fakey, but you get this nice like dirt around the edges, like that. And that's a pretty good starting point for the metal. But we also want to have some surface information, like some scratches in the bump channel. So I'm gonna do that with procedurals. It's another example. So you can go to let's see, where does it live? Here, noise. So you can have etched, for example, which is a pretty good. It's pretty easy to use. I'm gonna bring up the so here I'm gonna just put it in the diffuse color for now, just so we can see it. And you can see it's way too big, so I go to the texture locator, make it way smaller. But this is going to be way too noisy, so we're going to have to mask that out. And also I want a little bit more contrast in it, so we're going to go here and crank up the number of octaves. There. So to mask this out, I'm going to create another noise texture. This one can just be like regular noise. I don't know how big we should make this one. Oh, not that small. And this one we're going to use to mask out the etched things. So what we do want to have is more contrast in it though, so I'm gonna crank up the gain here to like 90%, maybe more. Maybe we can even crank it up to 99%. There, something like that. And then we can use the bias to tweak how much we're actually gonna have. I can just fiddle around with these values. I think I want the, let's say 200. Yeah, 100 is even better. Okay, so there's no good way of previewing this other than to just drag this here. So now this actually masks this layer here, and we can see how much we're gonna get. I think that's probably a good amount, so I'm just going to set this to a bump. Problem is, that can give you some problems. Let's see, yeah. See here we have these islands, pretty much, because there was nothing else in the bump channel. So we're going to have to create a constant that we set to the bump channel. Because otherwise they didn't have anything to that was like behind it. We're gonna set this one to multiply anyway. That's probably too much bump value in this material, or maybe it isn't. Maybe this will be fine. Oops, a bit hardcore. Okay, let's crank it down to like 3 millimeters. Okay, so now we have some very, basic scratches. I kind of like these ones, but you do want scratches along the edges as well. So that's what I'm gonna set up now. I'm just gonna duplicate this one, and instead of this noise here, I'm gonna use a curvature mask. So I'm just gonna create yet another occlusion and set that to convexity. Crank down the distance a little bit. You can just use the this one to preview how the mask is going to look. Probably want to have a bit more contrast in it, and maybe a bit more bias. It's going to be so like this, for example. Now we can just use this as a mask for this one we duplicated. So I'm just going to delete this one here, and I'm just going to drag drop this one here, so it's a layer mask. And right now it's doing the opposite of what we want. It's masking out everywhere except where we want it to be. So I'm just going to invert it to get rid of all of these. And now we'll just have, we have no control over it, but we do have more scratches on the edges of things, like more dents. Very subtle, but they are there. So you can see them here and there. You're gonna see them a lot more once the renders clears up. Okay. Now there are a few things I want to clean up here in the rendering as well on the metal, and I think that actually these small highlights should be smaller. Or not the small ones, the medium ones. So they're 10 right now. I'm gonna set it into 8 millimeter. And I'm also going to go in and change the way some of these things are tagged. So, for example, this one here, I pretty much want this whole thing to be using the maybe not this part, maybe not that part, but this one should probably use the small highlight. This one I also noticed a bit wrong, so I'm just going to put that there. This one too. Because the thing with this shader is that you can choose, there's a setting so it only impacts the material itself, but since we're using several materials to blend between, we don't want that. So I'm just going to go here as well. Let's take all of this for you guys. Set this to be small as well. I don't know, maybe some of this stuff. Oh, take a look real quick here. So that looks a lot better. Also think our occlusion here was a bit too aggressive, so I'm just gonna put down the value a little bit, 75% maybe, and maybe change this color from completely black and change it to a little bit. Just don't want it to be completely black. And you also notice that as soon as you start using the bump nodes, the rendering starts to take a real hit. It goes way slower. So while we're working, I'm just going to disable these, because you see that makes it a lot faster. Okay, so that's start on the rendering on the metal. But we also want to have some more. I want to have some more roughness variation, basically, like different submaterials. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to create another group. I'm going to put it on top here, and then I'm going to use another of my tagging things that I have. So I'm just going to tag this one on color 1, which right now doesn't do anything, but we can set here the selection set and then the color 1, and now whatever is in this one will impact this. I can, for example, take this one as well, maybe here, color 1 as well. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to create a constant that I'm going to set to the roughness channel. I'm going to set it to be an overlay. And then we have the value here, 100%, which means it's very, it's 100% rough. So I'm going to set this to a lower value, maybe 15%, which is going to make this part here more shiny. So we take a look, see how it looks. So now we have like an overlay that makes this part a bit more shiny than the rest, which is nice. Just for a little bit of variation in the shading. I want to take that and apply that to some more parts. So for example, this one here, maybe. And maybe this part here. Just to break up the texturing a little bit. I think that can definitely do that on the, for example, on the inside. You can go and grab all of this here, and or maybe we can just do it on these, for example, and the inside here. Maybe on the inside on this one as well. And this one here. Okay, let's take a look. It's not, you know, anything drastic, but it does give a little bit of, you know, easy texturing choices, just to make something, you know, nothing major, but it's pretty much you can do whatever you want with it. So it's pretty all right. So let's go back to the tab here and basically do a similar thing. We're just gonna duplicate this one here, and we're gonna make one that is going in the other direction, one that is rougher. So for example, if we would tag these parts here with color 2, we can set this one here to color 2, and then we can set this one here. Instead of being 15, we can set it to be like 60 maybe, or maybe 70. Let's take something big. Maybe we can take this entire thing here and like that. So let's take a look at that. It's very visible. If we set to 100, that's not pleasant at all. move this back into the default position here, so I can spin it around a bit better. Yeah, so that's of course way too much. So I can shuffle these around here. So this one, instead of being overlay, we can just set this one to be screen. Because the overlay was bringing out some things I didn't like. So then we need to turn this value down, so maybe 30%. 30% difference versus the normal one, or maybe 40. Still gives me some results I don't want, so maybe set it to normal and then put it as 100%, and we'll change the opacity instead. So now add, let's use add instead. So you can basically, you can play around with these blend modes however you want. I'm just trying to get something here that I like. I think it brings up the texture too much. Whatever I do, feels like. Maybe something like this, just to have some variation in it. And then I want to do another, like one last addition. The method is that I want to add a third color, but this one I'm gonna do something completely different with. So I'm just gonna take all of this here, entire underside, grab this one as well. I'll just have to. Okay. But that is color 3, and then this one I have to. This color 1 again. There we go. So I'm just going to create a new folder again, a new group. This one I'm going to put under all of these, because I'm going to do something different with it. So this one I'm going to set to selection set and color 3. I'm going to add occlusion here, and I'm going to basically change this from being a bare metal to a painted metal. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to do another of these convexity masks, similar settings like the other ones, 100mm range, and then I'm going to change it to a color. Well, what color should we have? Maybe something a little bit darker. Something like this. And then we're going to keep this one alpha at 0, because we don't want this one to be part of this at all. And I think that's fine. And we're going to do an instance of this. We're going to set this one to specular amount, and then we're going to set this value for the paint for like 10%, and then this one is not going to be a part of it at all. So if I did this right now, let's see if I did. Yeah. So now we have a painted part here. Where the paint has been flaked off on the edges. Just a very unnatural flaking, very even, but it's about as deep as we will go for now. And by using the specular amount as well, we also made sure that it was not all metal. So that's why we did it both in the diffuse and in the specular channel. Now we can also see that this one on the other side is not the mirrored one, so we're gonna delete that and mirror this over. And this detail is not there either. Catastrophe. Probably a whole bunch of these that we missed. But that's okay, it's sloppiness. Okay, so we have something like this. And now of course we can change the color to be whatever we want. Make it like, oh, that was the wrong one. This one. Want it to be a bit brighter, more blue, or you know, whatever we want it to be. Alright, so one last thing that I want to address, and that's the these decals here. And it's that they look very unnatural right now, because they are very, very clean and there's no wear and tear on them. So what we're going to do is that we're going to use group masks, because before we only used the layer masks. We drag drop something to a layer, and then that's the mask for that that node. But you can also use a group mask that is just working within a group, and they are much more expensive rendering wise for some reason, but they're pretty useful because you can stack several masks. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to add several procedural noise textures. So I'm going to go in here and get some noise textures. Use some etched, similar one as before. Crank up the octaves. And cubic mapped, maybe, I don't know how big it should be, probably pretty small, maybe like half of this, 80 millimeters. And let's crank up the contrast in it as well. So let's crank up the gain to like 99%, bias to like 90. I'm putting it as diffuse color for now, so we can just look at it like this. See if it's even here. Well, I can't even tell. Alright, because you can't set them to cubic, I think. Oh, the bias was way too high. Okay, so something like this. Probably crank it up a little bit more, like this. So this doesn't do much, but it does a little bit. We do want more, so I'm going to add more noise. I'm going to add some always get lost here. Some hybrid. I'm going to have more octaves, a bit higher frequency in them. Same thing here, we're gonna crank up the contrast because we don't want to have, like, you know, tear off the paint flakes. We don't want any, you know, gradual torn off stuff. So this probably need to do something similar about the scale. It's a bit crazy. I think that we need to crank down the bias a bit, or crank it up. So you can play with these settings like a lot, but I think this one needs to be way smaller. Maybe like that. And then we just put this one as multiply. And we can duplicate it. Let's see if we can just do another noise seed and then invert it, and maybe we can screen it instead. So this just looks like a bunch of noise now. We'll see if it works. And we'll just set all of these to shader control, group mask. Just go to recent here. So at least some wear and tear. And we'll look at the final color now. It looks a little bit better, but they still look a bit too artificial, so I'm just going to crank down the opacity, like it's 80% maybe, but 90. I think that's fair. And that's pretty much it for the rendering. So I'm just going to let this one sit here for a little bit. So here we have the finished render. Zoom in a little bit here, so that's what it looks like. So there are a few things, a few notes here. If you push the resolution up here in the frame width and height, and it's bigger than your preview render window. If you go in here, you have the full resolution toggle, so then it renders in the full resolution, and then you can't move around because it's locked. You also have the render all outputs, so that you render the alpha channel as well. So now I have the alpha output here, and the final color output. And it also depends on what gamma you want in your final image, because you see up here, before I was setting this to linear, the default is sRGB, and you can set this in your output, in your render outputs. So try this here, you have the output color space. But if you save an image, you can save it as the render passes here, or you can just save it as an image. So I usually save it as an image, and then I choose 16-bit PNG. You can just see this O2, and here it is in Photoshop. And now you see it's much brighter than it was in Modo, because it is different gamma. So it depends on what you want. So for example, quickly adjustable. This, I normally save this out as a PNG, just because then I have no background. So if you use an HDR background and you want to do some editing, it's easiest to just save it out like this, and you don't have to mask it out yourself afterwards. So that's pretty convenient. And that's it from me, and I hope you like this tutorial.